Right. So this is CSF new perspectives from us. Now, first thing what I wanted to tell you, mind is the biggest lab. So without any doubt, all the people that we have talked about, Leonardo da Vinci, everybody, they did not practice evidence-based stuff. And most of the biggest discoveries has been done in that time, because the mind was the biggest lab at that time. You know, today we don't use the mind. Most of the guys don't use the mind. They use big, huge infrastructures as labs, and therefore, you know, our breakthroughs are not very good. So always remember, for the young neurosurgeons, I should tell you, mind is the biggest lab. Now I'm going to tell you, back in 2007, I made a mistake of misunderstanding a patient of trauma for a patient of aneurysm. I will not tell you how it happened, but in a patient of trauma, I thought it was an aneurysm because there was a switch in patients. And I went ahead and opened all the cisterns and looked for the aneurysm for a couple of hours and could not find it. And when I panicked, I asked my assistant, I cannot find an aneurysm. And this man told me very nonchalantly that this is the trauma patient. So I was angry. Of course, I told him things which I cannot translate for you right now. But the end of the day, what happened is the brain was very lax. I saw that there was a severe traumatic brain injury. And I saw the scans. I had seen the scans already. And that is where our journey began, way back in 2007. The first thing I thought was, if I opened the cisterns, the brain was getting lax. I treated the trauma just like an aneurysm, and things changed. Then I started thinking why that happened. Because I did not know, if I drained the CSF, how did the brain go lax? I did not know. So I had to figure out how that happened. So then we thought the CSF at the base of the brain is probably communicating with the brain. You know why we thought that was because we understood that we know whether we believe in God or not. You must understand that the human brain is one of the most magnificent, there are no words to describe it. It is one of the most magnificent creations on earth. Its cooling system should be magnificent. Its cleaning system must be magnificent. So the CSF, if we think that the CSF is just there to float the brain on, it's a completely stupid way of thinking. So I started thinking that the CSF is changed every 3-4 times a day. 3-4 times the CSF is changed. Why would the CSF be changed 3 to 4 times a day? The only reason why somebody would change CSF 3 to 4 times a day if it's getting dirty. If something is happening to it, the constitutions are changing. So I thought there must be some way the CSF is communicating with the brain. This was way back in 2007, and G-lymphatic system was not there at all at that time. So then I thought, if the CSF is getting inside, in trauma, there was an accelerated process of CSF getting inside. That is why I thought that you have trauma and 2 hours later, you don't see any cisterns. You see, there are 120 ml of CSF at the base of the brain. And this 120 ml of CSF, how can it disappear 2 hours after trauma, severe head trauma? Take a scan, no cisterns seen. Where is the CSF gone? So some of the neurosurgeons that I know, they told me, oh, that is easy, the brain is compressing it. I immediately understood that they didn't know the basics of physics. If you take 100 ml of a bottle, something like this, try to compress it, it's impossible. The whole science of hydraulics is based on that. Its fluid cannot be compressed so much. It will take tremendous amount of force. So those guys did not know their physics, and as neurosurgeons, we are not expected to know much physics, but we should know the basics at least. So I thought, no, this is not what is happening. So where is the CSF disappearing? Somebody told me it is gone to the spinal canal. That was again impossible. Imagine 80 ml of CSF going into the spinal canal. The pressures would be so high that the spinal cord will infarct. So where is the CSF going? The CSF is obviously going into the brain. And that is exactly why you have a very, very tight brain and no CSF seen. So then I had to figure out how the CSF is going into the brain. So I started looking at every single possible way. As Vlad told me, I was unorthodox, I never listened to anybody. I mean, whether that is neurosurgery or whether it is life, I generally don't listen to anybody. I have my own ways of looking at things. So I started looking at all the papers, and I figured out that there are these interesting spaces around the vessels which communicate all throughout the brain. And these spaces are called Virchow-Robin spaces. And I thought, CSF must be going in through there. Now, there were some papers which said, if you inject something into the system, it doesn't go into the brain. And these guys were injecting markers which were huge. And imagine if you have a door, this is my usual example. If you have a door and if you say the elephant doesn't come through the door and you say the door doesn't exist, that's stupidity. So I understood that the CSF goes in to the brain, and the CSF definitely goes into the brain in trauma, and that is how we described CSF shift edema. So this was the CSF shift edema that we described. We got it published. It is now, these are textbook chapters, these are papers. So this is the CSF shift edema is well known now. A lot of people don't agree with it. They will eventually agree, but this is what is CSF shift edema. And then we started thinking, why does the CSF go in at all? Other than the CSF shift edema, why does the CSF go in and at all into the brain? Then we thought about the fact that the brain is probably a water-cooled and water-cleaned system. But by that time, G-lymphatic system was out. The theory of G-lymphatic system was out. And we knew that Nedegard, Iype and Helene, they had described this, and I was in communication with them, and I was amazed to see what I was talking in 2007. I had no evidence of that, and this was proven by basic science. It was proven that CSF goes in. Now the question was, why does the CSF go in? So we figured, how does this, we started thinking, how does the CSF clean and cool the brain? So it has to be two different pathways. The first pathway is the cooling of the brain by CSF. So you see, what we proposed was crazy. You see, there are these huge sinuses. You have the maxillary sinus, you have the sphenoid sinus, you have the ethmoid sinus, you have the frontal sinus. And in the epicenter of these sinuses, you have the suprasellar system. And what exactly are sinuses? They are spaces, large cavernous spaces lined with wet mucosa. And it is like, these are like sweaty t-shirts you wear. Imagine you are very warm and you're sweating, and you go sit under a fan. What is the fan here? The fan is your breathing. When you are breathing, what happens is the air circulates through all these sinuses. It's amazing, but the air circulates through all these sinuses when you are breathing. And what happens? Because of this air circulation, the mucosa, it evaporates faster. It is like putting your clothes to dry in front of a fan. I'm sure many people have done this when you're living in closed rooms, in dormitories and all that. We put a fan to dry our clothes. Exactly what is happening. But here, what happens is, when this mucosa evaporates because of this air movement, it becomes cooler because the latent heat of evaporation is given off. That is the principle of air conditioning. That is the principle of every cooling device. So what happens is, the mucosa which lines these sinuses, they are like an air conditioner. And the epicenter of it is the suprasellar cistern. And the suprasellar cistern is cooled. Now you have 2 to 2.5 degrees cooler CSF in the suprasellar cistern. Now, how does this go into the brain? That is also very interesting, because the Varsho-Robin spaces, they are around vessels. I went to tours and I went to Leonardo da Vinci's museum and I saw something called Archimedes screw. Same principle. When a vessel is pulsating, it is a wave, like a screw being turned. Same thing. A screw being turned is a wave. A vessel pulsating is a wave. So when a vessel is pulsating and it is in contact with the cistern, which is cooled, the cooled CSF is pumped into the brain by the pulsatility of these vessels. Exactly what this is. This is the diagram that we drew. So imagine the sinuses, by letting out, by evaporating because of the air circulation, when you are breathing, is cooled. That cools the suprasellar cistern, and that cooled CSF is pumped into the brain by the pulsatility of these vessels into every single square millimeter of the brain. Imagine what a beautiful cooling system this is. Now, cleaning. Cleaning is separate. It happens only in the night. So for that, you need to have contact with the ISF of the brain, interstitial fluid. And because of the blood-brain barrier, that's not possible all the time. So in the night, when you're sleeping, that is what G lymphatic system talks about. Aquaporin 4 channels open up. And then the CSF goes, that gets in contact with the ISF, cleans all the chloride, lactate, and all the metabolites. And in the morning, you're fresh. After your sleep, you're fresh, because all these metabolites which build up, because the brain is a metabolic computer. It is not an electric computer. It's a metabolic computer. All these metabolites accumulate. And these, when you sleep, what happens is, these aquaporin 4 channels open up. CSF goes in, collects all these bad molecules, metabolites, and it cleans. So the cleaning pathway is separate. It happens in the night. That's why sleep is so essential. And cooling happens all the time. Cooling is, the cooling tubes are not in touch with the G lymphatic pathway. Your Varsho-Robin spaces are not in touch with your ISF, but it's all over the brain. So cooling happens all the time. Cleaning happens in the night. This was mind-blowing for us. Just the idea was mind-blowing for us. So we got it published in many papers and as textbook chapters in Springer Neuro Series. And now we've been, it's featured in Nature, it's featured in Scientific American. So this is the picture that the sinuses are cooling, supracellular system which is cooled, and the Virchow-Robin pathways. This is the original picture that we drew, and it is there in all these textbook chapters. So now what are the future directions? The future directions, we figured that when the pulsatility of these vessels are affected, in Alzheimer's, if you see, the pulsatility of these vessels are affected. And when the pulsatility of these vessels are affected, cleaning as well as cooling is affected. And heat shock proteins lay down neurofibrillary tangles. And the Virchow-Robin spaces, if you see, in many neurodegenerative diseases, you find that the Virchow-Robin spaces are blocked by amyloid. So maybe if we could figure out a way to have an effective cooling, maybe I might design a cooling helmet, and probably that might help. Or I might design something which can cool the brain from within the sinuses more effectively. Maybe we can do that in trauma patients and see, instead of completely cooling the whole body, if we could probably design something that could cool just the brain by the same mechanism. Maybe 10 degree saline circulating through a device inside the sinuses, and maybe we should see what happens. So the future is, there's a lot of possibilities, amazing possibilities. This is what we have already, we have hypothesized. Some of it has been proven, some of it will be proved, but this is what we have done with when it comes to CSF. So I would say it's not a small contribution from our mind lab. So thank you very much for listening. Any questions? If you have, please.
Iype, thank you very much, and thanks for keeping the time. As always, very unorthodox and very, very interesting. I believe that there will be rather a lot of questions and lots of criticism as well, but that's okay. That's the progress.